Welcome to Three Devs and a Maybe. Now introducing your show hosts, Michael Budd, Fraser Hart, Lewis Caines, and Ed Mann.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Three Devs and a Maybe. It's been a little while, but we're back, and I'm joined by Ed Mann. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you, sir. How are you doing?
Yes, I'm good. I'm back from holiday and all rested and raring to go. So, yes.
Can I just say something, right? I said at the beginning of the show, before we recorded, I was like, I'm a little nervous. And you're like, are you nervous, really? And then you almost messed up that intro. So you must be nervous a little bit too. We've been off the airways.
Not even nearly. I did mess up the intro completely. So, well, it has been a while, hasn't it?
It has August.
Yeah.
Like late August was the last one we released, which is way too long. So we're very sorry to be off the airwaves. The airwaves.
Yeah.
But we've got a lot to talk about, a lot of things to catch up on. So I think we should just get right into it. So what you been up to, Mixter?
Get into the meat. What have I been up to? Okay, so I've been on holiday. That was nice. And
where'd you go?
I went to Portugal for
very nice.
1 week, and was very lucky. The weather was good and didn't really go much further than the pool that was in our apartment, which was amazing, and it was just a good time to chill out with Toby and stuff. And
did you read any computer books? Because I know typically on holiday you'll dabble in that.
Well, I took my Uncle Bob book, The Clean Coder, and but I didn't really read an awful lot, to be honest. Whilst I was away, I did read a book about Elon Musk, which was really, really interesting, really, really good. And the book I read I think it was just called Elon Musk. By the author was Ashley Vance, I think. I'd not really heard of him, but I don't know if he's a big author in the States or whatever. But really good, really interesting. Kind of goes through the whole history of his childhood, living in South Africa, moving over to Canada and the States, and doing the whole Silicon Valley thing. And yeah, it's really interesting because it talks about him, like he's obviously around at the beginning of the web, and his first sort of big project was almost like a directory site. And I remember all those directory sites when the web was first coming into life, and there wasn't really any great way of searching for websites, was there? There was no, Google really hadn't come around right at the beginning, and so directory sites were the way to go if you wanted to find where sites were. And his one was a bit different. I think it was eventually called Zip2, which I actually thought, it must be something to do with like zip files or something. But it was kind of like, you find a company and then it gives you like directions and then reverse directions, etc. And really interesting hearing about that and sort of all the bugs that they had and how they got it off the ground. And I think he sold that site for about $22 million, I think it was, or his share in it for $22 million. So
what a sucker! What a sucker!
Well, yeah, it's interesting because we were talking today in the office where I work, and they were saying about some company who paid about $2,000 to go on a directory site. And I was like, I'm amazed anyone goes on any directory site anymore. Like, can't imagine them having a place in today's market.
That's a lot of money, isn't it? Like to put on to some premium directory site, I'm assuming.
Yeah, exactly that. And but no, it was really interesting. Elon Musk spoke, and obviously he went on from that to like working on PayPal, and then obviously SpaceX and Tesla, and I mean, like, I think so many people have called him insane over the years, thinking, he's never going to accomplish this, and he's every time he just knocks it out of the park. And I think when he was a little boy, he apparently said, when I'm older, I'm going to put men on Mars, and now I think he said 2024 or something like that. He wants to put the first man on Mars. So, it'd be interesting to see if he does. I certainly wouldn't put it past him, to be perfectly honest. So, yeah, that was really inspiring. Apparently in the book, it said that he's not the best coder in the world. He's obviously clearly a genius, though, like with some of his ideas and his understanding of things. He's able to, take things like understanding rocket science and pick it up very quickly. But apparently a lot of his programmers took exception with the way that he did things. So, I definitely recommend that book. But otherwise, I have been working my way through the Clean Coder book, and that continues to interest me and keep me on my toes, really. So other than that, what I've been working on at work, sort of, I built like an email broadcasting thing, which, usually I would think, well, don't reinvent the wheel when you've got things out there that do that kind of thing for you. But whilst I did think that, it was tricky because a lot of the emails we want to send out contain information that's in our database, and to get that information easily and send it all in one go, it was kind of like, it was easiest just to, create this template thing, and then you just throw this email on the queue and send them all out that way. So it's probably not the best way of doing things, but for me, it seemed easiest. But we sort of started using that in anger this week, and we've emailed like over 2,000 people, and it's gone pretty well, to be fair. I think we had like one issue, which was more human error than anything else, which was a bit embarrassing, but that was just where the subject went out wrong. But other than that, it's gone okay, to be fair. So
that's cool, man. Darn you! Was it autofill in Google Chrome?
Yeah, it was autofill on the subject line, and it put in the person who was using it put in their email address. So I think it was about 800 users got an email with this email address as a subject line. So, but even still, the response was pretty good. So, yeah.
It's like, I love that subject. This is a great one.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's just like a really pioneering marketing tactic. So, yeah.
Can I just say, actually, go to two things then? So, the Elon Musk book that you read. So, it obviously must have influenced you, because immediately when you come off holiday, we get a WhatsApp saying that you're going to become an engineer and that you want to do an engineering degree. Firstly, is this true? And secondly, are you insane?
I don't know. I think I'm not saying it's going to be imminent, but I definitely wouldn't rule it out in the next few years, me doing something. And obviously, like saying I'm going to do an engineering degree, there are so many different types of engineering. So,
what would you specialize in?
I really don't know. But for example, like for me, like what really interests me is like, how does software in a washing machine work? I don't know. Like, and how does software in a car work? How does it actually impact the physical components? And that's what is like, to me, is still like some sort of, magic. And I'd love to sort of understand what actually is happening. So yeah, I definitely wouldn't rule it out. But at the moment, I don't think I could afford it, and I don't really have the time to do it. But I definitely think I'd be tempted to do that at some point. Yeah.
No, it's very cool, man. I love it. You've always learning. That's got to stay hungry.
Well, you say that. I think, come back from holiday, I think I need to push myself on something, whether it's like different languages or something. I'm not really happy that I'm pushing myself enough at the minute. Yeah, it's tricky. I think a lot of my reading recently has been on more like sort of syntax and how to code the right way, hence the Uncle Bob book. But then I have been reading the ES6 book as well, so perhaps being a bit too hard on myself. But
I think reading these Clean Coder book is like, for me, that is a defining book for sure, and it's one of those like must reads if you have a must read list in the computing world. If you're a programmer, that is definitely a book to read. And for me, it was very influential in how I decide to program, how I go about programming today, how I tackle a problem, how I think of the problem. So, no, I think it's a great book. And how are you finding it? Are you enjoying like the actual advice in it?
Yeah, I definitely am. And it's having an immediate impact, to be fair. I mean, I have started now trying to do more the TDD way. I am trying to write the test first before I do anything. And then where I've found code that hasn't been tested, I'm now putting tests in, so I'm sort of retrofitting those tests and realizing how untestable my code is.
I noticed the tweets. That is funny, isn't it? When you start thinking in like, it's almost just like better design format, like design. But then it's hard though, because I say that better design, but what I really mean is that trade-off between getting something done and making something that you can future-proof and that you can easily abstract out and test and all these type of things.
I think that's it. And there's some things that take more time than others. Like, for example, I kind of think, well, how do I test that a Stripe payment will go through? And all you can really do, I guess, is mock the kind of responses you would get from Stripe, so you know that you're reacting it in a certain way. But
that's it, like a contract test with you, and like, do you provide the right things to what Stripe provide, and what if they return these things, do I react to them in the right way?
Yeah, and I think Uncle Bob says, doesn't he? He talks about, I think, like you're saying, like abstraction, but like wrapping any third-party API that you use, you sort of wrap it in your own code, and so you can make sure that it's more testable. And then if you change that third-party service, then it's easier to test as well. So there's a lot of things that, I'm really bought into, and I think some things he sometimes says that I'm not sure about, and obviously there's always going to be that debate of what is good code. And he says at one point of the book, I think he says code that has no test is not good code. And that's kind of like, well, that's interesting, because I'm sure there's most people who listen to this podcast will have code that's not tested. Does that mean it's bad code? I don't know, but his definition certainly is that it should be tested. So it's an interesting one, isn't it?
It's a very, very interesting one. And I think it's trying to apply rules to something which can be very abstract and very kind of your own opinion and personal taste as much as anything. But I do like some of the rules, the idea of breaking out functions, having a lot of help of private functions that kind of tell a story. The idea is you're trying to explain through the code how you're solving that problem. Yeah. And then with the test, you're saying what the problem is that you're trying to solve. So obviously, if you have both, that helps, because if you only have the code that's actually solving the problem, it's very hard to know what the problem is you're trying to solve without external documentation or just kind of a hunch that this is exactly what is, why we're doing this. Yeah. That's why the two kind of, I think, partner together with the test and the actual code itself. I say, I think it's a great book, and I'm really glad and pleased that you're going through it. Have you started looking at any of his clean code videos?
No, I haven't actually. I need to do that. I'll probably do that after the book, but it's still, I think I'm probably about halfway through, and I'm really one of the things I really want to learn about, and I think I'm coming on to it now at the moment in the book, is kind of like testing things at like the persistence level, and I'm always unsure, like, for example, a bit of code that I wanted to test was, again, when a payment comes through, which then has lots of things that trigger from that. So, a payment comes in, which creates an invoice, which creates a PDF, and all these kind of things. Well, do you create a record in the database? Do you have a separate database for testing? And if you use a live database, you create it and then delete it afterwards. And I mean, probably sound like an idiot saying these things. I really don't know what the answers are to those questions, but I think I'm coming up to that in the book. So.
It's, do you run with the fact of I want to test the whole stack, so I'm doing a whole integration test where I'm really kind of just testing everything, or a functional test more like, where I'm actually testing the whole suite and that it all works, like they all marry together, the fact that, the persistence actually connects to the database works, the triggers work in the database, and all these kind of, if you've got this abstract, kind of like very split out system, or do you kind of do integration tests where you're testing and integrating small bits together and plugging them in? And, does my persistence, when I do use this service, does the in-memory repository that I'm using actually, kind of signal that this event occurred, this kind of action occurred, and it happened, and it was a state change. It's all these different levels, and it's kind of working out where you want to be. And for me, it's about being confident in code. So if I'm confident in my code without a test, okay, but I'm more confident always with a test. So it depends where that test is. Now, is it where, is it at the very kind of like fundamental level, at the package level, at the domain level? I want to ensure that these invariants stay there, and I want to make, I want to test that these invariants, are invariant essentially. And also am I sure that I'm going to save these records and they're actually going to go into the database, and I'm actually going to, create emails from them, or whatever actions you're going to do. It's wherever on the scale you want to feel confident. And to me, honestly, I think just writing a test in itself is just a good thing. Like, you can get into over kind of thinking it, and it's like, oh, I don't want to write a test at all because it will be a bad test. And it's like, no test is bad. Like, I know you're going to get brittle tests, but at least a test is a test. Like, I know people say that some tests are bad because, it's like, oh, but this test always fails, or, there's like these things. But for me, it's like, well, you've got to rewrite that test then, firstly. But I still think having that test is valuable because at least it's trying to show some aid in what the behavior of the program is.
I guess the other issue with that is when your application becomes so big and running those tests takes half an hour and then you have to do that to deploy, then it's kind of like, then it gets tricky, doesn't it?
Yeah, to be honest, so we run like parallel test suites and stuff like that to help there. Databases, you're saying like with persistence, using transactions for quick rollbacks and things if you are going to do persistent stuff. A lot of the a lot of the stuff, if you design things in a way where you have your domain logic and then you have your bridge, you have, bridging the gap between that and the persistence and the delivery, you can kind of get away with much smaller tests, like much quicker tests, because, the domain only hits things within the domain. It doesn't have to deal with any kind of external third party stuff. And then you slowly build yourself up. So, throughout kind of tweaking the domain level, you can just run those unit tests. And then once it gets to like the Jenkins build, and then it starts running the bigger tests to see what happens. So you can kind of scale out, not having to run the whole test suite all the time, and get slowly bigger levels of confidence.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, after reading the Elon Musk book and reading about how hard it was to get a rocket up into space, it kind of makes testing your application and debugging your application seem pretty easy.
Well, exactly. So were there tests for when, man went onto the moon? I don't know.
There must have been, surely. There must have been millions, I would have thought. But yeah. Oh, well, who knows? I'm going
to have to Google that. I will Google that and put some stuff in the show notes to see if there is, because it would be funny to see how much, was it just manual testing? Did they do their own form of unit testing? I don't know.
Yeah. Get NASA on the podcast. That's what I say. That'd be good.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, yeah. They'd definitely come on. 3 dozen a maybe.
So enough about me. What have you been up to?
What have I been up to, sir? Well, saying at the beginning where it's been since August, and I was looking through back at that podcast we did, and it was a lot about Bitcoin. I'll have to say, that I am still on the Bitcoin train, learning about Bitcoin internals and stuff, and I'm loving it. It's so interesting. The world of Bitcoin is just up and down. Markets are up and down, all this kind of jazz with it. There was a lot of like debate and discussion around SegWit 2x, and now that's been stopped. So yeah, fight the power and all that. I didn't believe in 2x. I said no 2x. I was thinking, we don't want that. So I'm really happy with that. There's a lot of stuff in the internal stuff I've been looking into. There's really good lectures and stuff that I'll put in the show notes that I've been listening to and reading. And then finally, it's kind of like I've actually tried to be giving back to it. The learning resources is I've been starting to do some YouTube videos, and released a couple the last couple of days where I've just been going over some of the like JS bins that I've been creating in my own time to learn like how Merkle trees and Merkle roots work, and proving Merkle proofs, and how Bitcoin and Bitcoin blocks use these to verify transactions and stuff like that. So I won't gab on about it on the podcast, but I'll just put it in the show notes. If you're interested in that, check out those videos and let me know what you think. Kind of another thing is I've got myself a hardware wallet. So I've got myself a Trezor, and essentially that's, as the word says, hardware. So you actually have a physical wallet, in quotes, that stores your private keys. So that's quite cool and quite fun to play with. I've seen that you can actually get yourself, I think for £100, like a small ASCII USB miner. Now you're not going to make any money on it, but it's just fun to like learn how, like kind of hardware, because ASCII mining is essentially programmed miners. So they're like in hardware, so the chip based instead of software, or instead of like GPU based and in CPU based stuff. So it's like kind of its primary design is to actually just do these hashes at crazy speeds. But you aren't going to get any money for it. But it's just like a learning thing. And all the comments on Amazon say that, where it's like you're not going to get any money for it, but as a learning resource, this is a great thing. And I'm half tempted, but I don't think I can ask Amy, hey, I'm going to spend £100 on just something that's completely pointless.
Yeah, that's a tough sell. That
it is a little bit, but no, I mean. Bitcoin is a very interesting thing, and the whole cryptocurrency space is, and YouTube actually is absolutely insane for the amount of like videos that publishers, like people like us, just publish videos, and they're just super interesting. And there's like you can just get your own little like hub of subscribers that you like, and kind of have your own little, it's almost like your own little TV kind of show, kind of programming where you have like, oh yeah, I watch that, the daily updates and things like that. So highly recommend just like taking advantage of what you can get on YouTube.
Yeah, awesome.
And then finally, the big one is, so we spent I think it's been like a couple of weeks now where we've made the full switch to AWS, Amazon Web Services. It's been in the pipeline for a while now. A little backstory with it. So we initially had dedicated boxes, dedicated beefy server boxes in that we owned essentially. So we had a couple of those. We had a database one, we had a web one, and the web one would comprise of all of the applications, all the APIs, everything, supervisor, and we'd also have like one small one that was an AWS, just so we had it distributed and out of the way. But yeah, so we were on hardware, dedicated hardware, and we got great performance for it. It was great value for money. it's one of those funny things where actually, like, you think about it, you're like, why don't you just stay on dedicated hardware? Because actually the value, the bang for your buck you get is actually better for that. And also, like performance type things, IOPS and things like that, kind of performance with hard drives. You've got the whole server. You haven't got to worry about sharing with other people. And you can kind of visually think of it, you can kind of conceptually think of it as, yes, this is a server, as opposed to how AWS, you have to think of it a little bit different. So we made the switch, and we made the switch for a couple of reasons. One is the fact that we want to be able to break out servers easier. So having dedicated boxes, one dedicated box, if someone wants to try and experiment, or, maybe a group of developers, we're trying to expand the team. So a group of developers want to go and do something and try something out. We would have to configure all that on that one single box where everything else happens. Now, if that fails, if something has a problem, we have to deal with it in its entirety, and it's kind of attacking the whole system. Because again, the one box, growing vertically, you're going to get this. If the box has problems, everything has problems. And also it means like experimentation, cleanup afterwards. What happens if we don't need that anymore? What happens if the API we don't want anymore? But it's all tied into this one box, and it just gets a bit messy. So the idea of actually splitting out into different different kind of EC2 instances or virtual systems is that you get this trade-off between the cost of it, the power of it, but also the flexibility of being able to just kind of expand and contract as you want. So one of the things was, to get that, well, we want to be ability to be able to test things, experiment, quickly change on stuff, and be far more kind of agile, in quotes, about it all. So that was the main aim for it. And another thing was to take advantage of all the stuff that AWS has to offer. And that is a lot. Like if you go and look through the AWS service list, you will just see heaps and heaps and heaps, and anything, they got it. If you want kind of serverless stuff, which is, one of the things they pioneered, you've got Lambda, and you've got API Gateway, and you've got like CloudWatch events to be able to kind of play around with that. And again, selfless plug, on YouTube, I've posted a couple of videos on there going through serverless, like the serverless like kind of framework, and going through how you would configure that with Lambdas and stuff. I'll put that in the show notes as well. Had a lot of fun with that, and I'm really enjoying playing around with serverless actually. But yeah, there's a host of them. There's Route 53 if you want to do with your DNS records. There's S3, which is like one of the pioneer ones. EC2 and S3 are like the creme de la creme of being around for a long time and kind of changing the way we think of computing. Because that's another thing. Like I don't think of it as a dedicated box anymore. I think of it as just, this is a virtual instance. If I'm spinning up an EC2 instance, I can configure it from a snapshot. I can save snapshots. I can make multiple of the same server. In fact, that's what I'm doing now. So one thing I need to do is I need to be able to create an A/B test box. So I need to just spin up another box that we can go to. Well, I can just make a snapshot of a box I've already got, put it up there, change the deploy, obviously to make it so it would be the different thing, and boom, I'm done. And these things are instantaneous and quick, and I can get rid of it and tear it down super easy as well. So the flexibility is a thing. I mean, the pricing is a bit more. And actually, that's the thing where I do say, for like, if you want best bang for your buck, go with dedicated hardware. Like if and it's another thing is if your performance throughput. And that's another thing where you get with like reserved instances and stuff. Like if you know how much throughput your website is going to get, you can reserve instances reserve EC2 instances and reserve space on AWS to get some savings. But the best bang for your buck is that just go dedicated then, if you know that already. Obviously, you're not going to get the ability to, use the services that AWS provide with all their ecosystem in their lovely world, but you'll be able to use some. But yeah, so like things like S3, and just there's a host of everything and anything. If you want to deal with, one of the things is I was like playing around with was like being able to do signups and user registration. Well, they've got something called Cognito, and that's essentially kind of like a user management system all built for you. So, the ability to be able to like interface with kind of like creating users and creating passwords, generating passwords, sending out validation, verification system, being able to use that then with serverless, with Lambda, being able to kind of pass into this as an authenticated route and all this kind of stuff. Just, yeah. I can go on and on and on and on about how awesome it is. But there were a couple of things that did actually kind of gotchas, in fact, like we had with moving. And it was probably because of the fact that, we came from a dedicated world kind of thing. One thing was RDS. So we did move our database over to RDS, which is AWS's managed relational database system.
Yeah.
And they provide Postgres. You use it, I know. So, you rave about it as well. In fact, I think I told you
recommended it. Yeah.
I did a Mickey there where I said to use it before I even used it, but I'm glad you're using it. And, it deals with stuff like multi-AZ, which is essentially like being able to split out between multiple dedicated server farms. So, if one goes down, they've got the other one available. And then, all this type of really cool stuff multiple snapshots, daily snapshots, ability to be able to do point-in-time snapshots. You can actually say, I want to do a point-in-time snapshot where it was 16:19 on this day, and I want you to snapshot to there, and it will actually do it. It's fascinating, and it's all done for you with no worrying. Failover in AZ, so failover to another system, if one fails, is all done for you. Perfect, absolutely great. But one thing is, and this is trying to understand, like from your dedicated or your current system, how much you're going to need in the AWS world. So, they talk about CPUs and they talk about that type of thing, but they really talk about like vCPUs and how much burst you have and all this kind of funky stuff. But it's understanding that what you're going to need and like where you're going to gauge. And one thing is we over provisioned quite a bit on our RDS instance. So we did use provisioned IOPS first, which was essentially a saying we want at least, so we're allocating that we want a dedicated 4,000 IOPS or whatever. So it means that the inputs and output reads per second on that disk are between that, so we can read and write very quickly, because we thought, we're going to need that, because we're going to need that when, obviously our database is the hub of our system. We need to make sure that we can take that over and we're still getting the same performance. Well, it actually turns out, though, that we didn't need that. And actually, once we'd gone to provisioned IOPS, we were spending quite a lot of money on it because we were using multi-AZ as well. And actually, eventually, we just had to revert back to just general SSD. So these are things you kind of have to bear in mind, that you may over-provision at the beginning and it's trying to like tail it back and stuff.
Sorry, I had the exact same thing, and we were paying for it for like 6 months. I didn't realize how expensive it was.
It's ridiculous, isn't it?
Oh, I guess one of my criticisms will be, like with the AWS, you've got the price calculator. I couldn't find anything with RDS that was like that. I mean, obviously you get like the billing forecaster, and it just show you a breakdown of the price, but it's quite hard to predict at times, I found. But
that's one thing, obviously, is like calculating, because they do it based on different metrics, per second, per minute, per hour, per transfer, throughput used, and all this. And then you're thinking to yourself, well, how much throughput do I use each day? And all this kind of stuff. It's like you have to, especially if you're trying to invest and go into it, you don't really know. Like you have to work it out from your current system, if you can, and monitor that for a bit to be able to do an accurate measurement, or you just take the risk, over provision a bit so you can kind of cater for it. But I know what you mean by that. It's funny though, because like general SSD, and these are the kind of weird abstractions and games around playing in this world as opposed to like the dedicated world, where general SSDs are, you have IOPS based on how many allocated gigabytes you have. So, if you have 100 gigabytes, you're going to get certain amount of IOPS, read and write. And then if you get 250, you get a bit more and all this. So you're actually it's actually better off maybe getting like a 500 gigabyte general SSD with whatever calculated IOPS that is, and then using provisioned IOPS at a certain less gigabyte, because we're thinking, getting less gigabytes, surely it'd be cheaper, but it's not. And it's this playing this game of working out. And another one is the T instances. So a lot of the fun things people do, like when you're experimenting stuff, is you'll use T2 micros and T2 nanos and all that stuff. And the T2 micros are great because they're in the free tier if you want it for the year. They're the cheapest one. And they're cheap because they're shared, really shared, and in that you are sharing those CPU resources. The idea is that you're trading off the fact that you're not going to be using that CPU, the full CPU usage all the time. And in fact, what you have is this concept of a CPU burst rate. So you have CPU credits, and the idea is that you get to allocate, using up a burst of, say, every, a CPU burst rate of 4 hours a day or something. So you can work at max at that time. And so that means then they can obviously cram more instances on a system, a physical hardware system, because they know they can actually, tailor and cater for that. But you have to bear in mind when you're playing the game of AWS that, so I was it was working fine. Everything was working lovely. I then ran and did a backup, which sparked up a lot of Postgres PG dumps, because I was doing like 5 jobs quickly doing a backup on this box. And then it all started to grind to a halt and bad things happened. And I was like, why is this happening? It's like, because you've exhausted your CPU credit balance. And I exhausted it, within a like ridiculously quick time because of this game. And then you move from like the T instances to then ones that are dedicated, like the C's and the M's and stuff, which will provide you with constants. A C is from compute, where you'll get a constant CPU compute cycles you can use. M is just the general, which is kind of like the boost up to the T from the T's. Like M is what people kind of would use and consider this a real server, because I can use it as max of the CPU as I want. I don't have to worry about this kind of stuff. And then like the R's are for memory, and there's so many different instance types you can play with. It's great. I mean, it is great that you'll be able to spin this up, do an experiment, tear it back down. But again, it comes at a price. If you're doing on-demand stuff, it's going to be a lot more, and you need to reserve things. So you have to play this kind of game. I think it's just kind of like the new cloud service world is just so different to how we used to think of it.
If you go down the reserving model, do you have to pay a certain amount up front or something like that?
So you get even better savings if you do that, yeah. So you can pay kind of like per month, or you can like, I think you have to pay a little bit up front and then like kind of trickle it in, or you can say reserve it for the whole year. I know I'm going to use this, or reserve it for like 5 years or something or whatever. And like, I mean, there's other games they play. Like I call them games because it kind of is. It's just like this playing the game of AWS. There's like whole lectures and guides on how to best optimize pricing on AWS because it's such a complex thing. But, you know, like the game of like spot instances. So spot instances are this idea that I have a bid price. So they say, okay, this is how much it's going to cost at this time to run your instance for an hour or something. You have a bid price. You say within the hours of like 6 and whatever in the morning or something, I want a bid price that if it goes to this bid price, I will start my instance because I'm happy to pay that much for that compute, and I'll do my stuff, and then it will say, okay, you can't have it anymore, and it will shut it down and do it, you know, and continue and kind of recursively do this. Now, that's a game which is great because it allows people who want to do these massive computations but don't want to spend all the money on this hardware to be able to, over time, you know, as long as their program actually can handle it, you know, to do these computations at a very cheap rate. And there's been a lot of good use cases where people have used things like spot instances to take advantage of it because they can run it at like ridiculous times, you know, of the day and just do some compute and shut it down again and do it again. And, you know, they're only paying a certain amount because it's their bid price. But all this stuff you wouldn't get in a real world, in like dedicated world, because you'd have the box and that's it. So it's really is such a different way of playing. The other thing actually is learning this stuff, and I really recommend a Cloud Guru, their website, acloud.guru. Really great resources. They constantly go on about how pretty much the whole site is based in serverless, so it's based in Lambda, based on API Gateway. You know, it's very cheap for them to run. That's another thing with Lambdas. You know, you only pay for when it's running, so you don't have to provision servers, you don't have to worry about servers, and you only pay for how long you're using that Lambda for, up to 5 minutes, which is the max. But yeah, so, you know, I would definitely recommend a Cloud Guru, and just YouTube as well has been great for like learning different AWS stuff.
Yeah, I'll definitely check out your videos. It sounds really interesting. But yeah, I must admit, I also use RDS for my databases.
Would you think about moving from DigitalOcean to AWS? Because you would get more performance latency-wise, like being in the same AZ.
Yeah, I don't know. It would take quite a lot to convince me to leave, to be honest with you.
Really?
Yeah, I like DigitalOcean. It's one of those things, I mean, you know, I usually will think about moving if I'm unhappy with something. It's like that whole kind of, if it's not broken, then
don't fix it.
Yeah, exactly. So
have you thought about moving your database then over to DigitalOcean and just kind of...
Well, yeah, I'm very reluctant to say change things when I mean, we've all seen what happens when things go wrong, and it's that kind of thing puts me off. But I don't know. I mean, how much latency do you think there is there?
You would get benefits, because I don't know where the DigitalOcean server actually is. I don't know, it's London, maybe.
It's London.
So you're going from London to Ireland. You would probably get benefits even if you wanted to stay in the AWS stack of just moving your RDS instance to the London region. You know, because this is when we started just getting into physical kind of things. I mean, these are milliseconds and stuff, but every request doing that just adds up over time. You know, really being really quite like, no, I don't want, you know, I want sub-millisecond times and all this type of stuff. And again, that was one thing with our dedicated boxes where between the actual proximity, and it was a dedicated line between our database and our web server. So we were getting ridiculously good times and actually design of applications. You know, we wouldn't worry too much about kind of doing a load of queries because we knew we could deal with it on the dedicated side. But moving over to AWS, you have to deal with a little bit of latency no matter what. You can get some provision, you can get some placement groups and stuff, but that's typically not really for what we're using. Like placement groups and things are when you want to actually share between servers and stuff and actually share the compute. So you're going to have like dedicated in quote lines between them. But you know, typically you're going to get greater latency. Luckily, hasn't been as big a problem as we kind of feared it would be, but it's something to bear in mind.
So, do you have anything with DigitalOcean anymore then?
I have my personal stuff, but I'm actually thinking of moving that over. They do something with AWS called Light Sale, which is actually very similar to the DigitalOcean approach, where you want to pay $5 a month and that's it. because obviously the AWS model may save you more. Like if you do a T2 Nano or T2 Micro, it's actually like $3 something or $4 for the whole month. But people like that kind of model of like, I pay $5, that's it. This is what I'm getting for it. And that's what Lightsail is essentially. It's the clone of what DigitalOcean is. Similarly, actually, I've noticed that DigitalOcean are taking and doing things called Spaces or something, which is their clone of S3. Like they're trying to use the S3 model because S3 is just the bee's knees. Like it's amazing. So cheap.
So talk to me about S3 then, because someone else has been talking to me about S3 and it just all seems like witchcraft to me at the moment. How does it all work?
So S3 is essentially, it's object storage. So it's not block storage, meaning you can't just put a file system on it. It's objects, meaning like images, documents, and things like that. And essentially, once you put it up there, it's safe forever. You know, you can upload people's files onto it. It will then do replication between different AZs. It will have it in multiple places in the same AZ. It does all this funky stuff behind the hood, under the hood for super cheap. Like storing it, gigabytes of stuff is super cheap. It doesn't matter. I think they provide like the 12 zeros actually for losing your data, and it's 99.99 for actually availability of it or something. But yeah, it's stupidly good for storing stuff. We use it all the time for all our uploads for people, because uploading to there means then obviously you don't have to store it yourself. It means then that multiple servers, if you're going to have like a load balanced approach where, you know, all these servers want to be able to actually access this stuff, you can just have it up in S3. It's just the best. Like it is the best solution for that. And they deal with everything, and it's infinite storage. You can consider it infinite storage of objects.
So yeah, you're right, because I got an email last night saying DigitalOcean introducing object storage. But what format do you, when you send this data to S3, what format data do you send it in?
You just upload it. You upload the file. So you can upload it in the browser. You can upload things using their command line. You can upload things using all of these numerous different API plugins and stuff in different languages for it, etc. You know, it's just, all it is just uploading files. So it's essentially like a file system in the browser that you can use. You know, well, not a file system. Sorry. It's like, yeah, objects. You have to consider them as objects. So they're just like files that you upload, not block storage, where actually it's like a real, because EBS is block storage in the AWS world, which is like for operating systems, etc. Objects are just things like images, pictures, and all this stuff, all the assets that you're going to need.
So in terms of like, say you send like, you upload 5 pictures of yourself because you're obsessed with taking selfies, and
absolutely
you want to keep a record of those files that you've uploaded to S3. How do you keep a record of the connection between you and those files?
So what you would do is you would upload, so you can pass it through. So you can say, okay, you don't even have to store it on your own server, and you can pass it through, and it provides you with a unique URL, which you then would store in your own database to actually, to be able to access it. So you would be storing obviously the metadata around it, kind of thing, where you want to store that. I mean, this is what Dropbox uses. Dropbox has its own metadata servers, but actually the actual objects, the real storage, is actually still in S3.
Okay, well that sounds really. That is definitely something I'm going to look into then, because at the moment I know I won't go into details in case I get like hacks or anything, but I've got files stored in a place where I don't want them to be stored. So
I store them in S3, encrypt them. You can store them encrypted, and it just deals with it. Now, one other thing as well, which is a great and beautiful thing about S3, is also its close relation, CloudFront. And so what CloudFront is it's this AWS's CDN. But the beautiful thing about CloudFront is you can essentially, everything in S3 obviously is stored, say, like I store my things in S3, I store it all in the Ireland region. Well, my customers are in London, so I can use CloudFront, which will actually just get all the stuff from S3, or like the things that gets requested for S3, go through their edge nodes, which are actually stored physically in the different geographical locations. So edge nodes are like all these different places in the world where they actually have these servers, and it will just go and get them in a very quick line they have to S3, go get them and store them in their cache for a while, or however long, you've got a TTL for, or how long they deem they want to keep it for. And so you're storing stuff and they're retrieving it some very close geographical location to them, which is invaluable if you've got like sites that are obviously worldwide, or if you've just got stuff that you want to make sure close proximity to where people are.
Okay, so here's another question. So you were talking about, and quite rightly talking about the nice ecosystem that Amazon has. Say this probably sounds quite unlikely, but say Amazon go bust tomorrow and they say, oh, thanks for being a customer, bye. How difficult then would that be to...
This is, and this was one of the debates we had when moving. You move to these systems, you are reliant now on them. The fact that they are a massive big fish and, we're just like a small one compared to them, a tiny one compared to them. You kind of feel like, yeah, we can piggyback on you and we'll be all right. We'll just reap the rewards of what you can give us. Things you can think of are like provisioning boxes and stuff. Like at the moment, ours is still kind of EC2 boxes, provision stuff there. We have S3, it's true, but we can get stuff down. So we make backups, RDS and stuff. So we make SQL backups daily into our own external sources. So through to other, like say Azure's or through to the Google platform. So other services that will then store that information. Because the idea being is, as you say, if AWS goes down, we need to be able to provision and get up and set up back online our boxes. Now, what's funny though is, it's who you store things with. Like, if you're using Route 53, it's which parts of AWS go down. Now, if the whole thing went down, if we're using Route 53, we can't point our server to anything else, our domain, so we're kind of screwed there. But, if you use that as an external resource, you hover or whatever for it, you can then think maybe what you would do is you'd have all your system on AWS, but then you'd be able to replicate it on a Google platform or an Azure platform and have that as backups if you really cared about that you feared for that as much. I'm not as fearful on that. I've kind of lessened that because of the fact that how, the rewards are so much greater. It's one of those things you kind of have to, as you say, kind of change your way of thinking. But things using like Puppet and being able to provision servers quickly if you're still using a server-based approach. The thing is, when you start getting into things like serverless and DynamoDB, and if you start really thinking of these things and start using those, yes, it's a lot harder to be agnostic and kind of be a base level, because at the moment all of our servers are just EC2 instances, but they're just Debian instances which then have our software on. So as long as we can run a Debian instance of Stretch, we can then just go up from there. But once you start moving over to using all these different things, you then have to realize, yes, you are kind of tying yourself up. And what are the pros there? There's cons there for sure, but you kind of have to realize, think, okay, how am I going to, do your doomsday, but see what is beneficial. And for us, it's that obviously the database is one of the primary ones because that's where the data is. We need to have that offshore, essentially out of their midst and in another place, just in case something bad happens. It's true.
Have you ever considered just hosting everything on your MacBook?
I think that's the best way, because I do think that only people should be able to access stuff when I'm using my MacBook. Yeah. So when my MacBook's on, I think, that's a prime time for people. And also I love it when IP addresses change, especially if they're like, if your private IP address changes. So people just don't know where it is. It's great.
Well, yeah, you send an email out, it's changed.
Exactly. Updated. Just, change your host file to this, please.
Exactly. I mean, that's the future right there.
Oh, man. But actually, I will say a couple of little things. So there's been a couple of bits security-wise that I've been doing, a couple of tools that I've been using. So one of them for security auditing is something called Linus, and it's really great. And it kind of just is a comprehensive suite of just running. It's a bash script. Essentially, it's like a massive bash script that runs through and goes through and checks loads of different things, configuration files, user groups, etc. Stuff like Nginx, Apaches, if you're running things like file integrity scanners and stuff, and all these things it does. So it's really good, like a comprehensive thing of just kind of getting a general overview of how your server is health-wise. Another thing I've been setting up is AIDE, which is Advanced Intrusion Detection Environment. And essentially what this does is so cool. You take a snapshot of like directories. So you say, I really care that the boot directory, the user directory, or the Etsy directory, the var directory, and all these different certain bits in them. I want a snapshot and say, please tell me, snapshot exactly what that state is at this time. So this is a safe state. So, you've got all the different MD5 hashes, SHA hashes of all the files. You've got the different groups of the files. You've got when they've been accessed, created, all this other gubbins. Store that, bring it into like a remote location. And then what you're able to do is every day or however long you can check. So you can bring it back in, you check, and you can see if anything's changed. And it will tell exactly where it's changed, when it changed, etc., and all this type of stuff. So you can see if there's been any intrusion. You can see if someone's like kind of maliciously put in a backdoor or maliciously put in a rootkit or something somewhere and trying to hide it. They can't get away with it because of the fact that this is in place. It's a great bit of software. The other thing I've put in is also cron apt. So one thing, again, like managing your own systems is great for certain things, but it also can be a pain. Like you have to keep them upgraded. Like you have to keep all the systems up to date. And especially when you start getting up, you have a couple of systems fine, but then when you start getting out into the 8s, the 10s, the 20s, the 100s maybe, it can get a bit of a ball ache and to try and manage all these different systems. So I use something called cron apt, and essentially what that does is it just on a cron basis, it will just run apt update, and then what is actually going to be updated. It would download the packages but not install them, and then it will send an email out to me saying, hey, by the way, this server needs these updated, so I can then go to that server and just do the updates for it. It's just a great way of kind of trying to automate some of these processes. I mean, really, you do like with safe upgrades, you could probably just do auto upgrading. Another thing you do is like, using containers and things like that, and images. So you just like pre-built images, you do an upgrade image, you then just release that and to shut down the other one if you want to do immutable servers and stuff. But there's so much cool stuff that you can do. But these have been a couple of little bits that over the last couple of weeks I've kind of really enjoyed.
Well, on that note, sort of tied in with what you just said, and I'll make this last thing I say because probably most of our listeners have stopped listening now, so it's probably just me and you. But one of the things I was told, like, when you first install PHP, the first thing you do is turn off the setting where you stop the ability to execute on the shell. Is it shell exec or something like that?
Yeah.
But obviously that could be really useful. And for me in particular, without giving too much away about the infrastructure that I built, we have like a reseller system. And even though I sort of second guess whether I made the right choice at the time, I have to live with it now, that all our resellers get like a cheap throwaway version of our software. All the business logic is done on the API, but they've just got like this little throwaway HTML application with the interface and everything. And in a sense, I want to make it so I can click a button and that will then create this instance. It will create all the host name, etc., etc. But I can't do that without opening up those functions, enabling those.
I would say maybe don't doing it in PHP and doing it just in Bash or something then. Like do it in Shell.
Yeah.
I think that's probably the easiest way. I do think, you're right with like the PHP stuff. The thing is though, is the PHP command line and being in the PHP web is different. So, if they've got access to your command line, you're screwed already. So allowing shell exec and stuff on the command line isn't bad. It's when it's in, obviously if they can do uploads and if they pass in with gets and all that typical kind of horrible stuff.
Yeah, that's a good point. One to think about, I think, for sure. Yeah, it's just more that I don't want it to have to be a programmer who can do that. I want it to be someone in an office who can just, we're just creating this new reseller. Boom.
Yeah, I mean, that is the problem, isn't it? Obviously, if you're in a web interface and then you want to be able to invoke this thing, it's hard, without doing an exec or something. I mean, maybe it'll be a case of it adds a record to a database that then gets supervisor or something to pick up or cron to pick up that they want to do it. And then, there's that kind of bit in the middle, kind of breaking up that thing.
That's a really nice workaround. Yeah, I like it.
You could do that. It says, they've invoked this, and it's like every 5 minutes we'll then do the upgrade if we need to.
Yes. Good thinking, man. Excellent. You've done well today. I'm happy with you.
Oh, man. Well, I think we can probably call this a wrap now. As you say, I don't think many people are listening to us anymore. And I know I've definitely just rambled on and on and on.
Yeah, it's just me, you, and my mum now. So
that's it. And my mum as well. So hi, mum, as well.
Hi, mums. Yeah.
Hi, mums. That's great. Oh dear. All right, man. Would you want to do the closing salutations or whatever we call it?
I'd love to. Thank you so much for putting up with our rambling, and it's been great to speak to you all. We will be back soon. That's a lie. I don't know when we'll be back, but
I love it. You should say that. Just soon is good because it's ambiguous enough.
They won't know.
They will never know.
No,
they'll never know. We may never release this episode.
That's true.
Who knows?
That's true. Yeah.
Well, if you're listening to it, we have released it, so it's kind of pointless.
Thanks for listening. Bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to 3 Devs and a Maybe. You can contact us at contact@3devsandamaybe.com or follow us on Twitter at 3 Devs and a Maybe.